I would recommend that teachers look into kind of how people used to teach a long time ago, because that is really what we need to do. So ironically, what AI is doing us, it's bringing us back to the core values of education, right? It's no longer kind of output and kind of creating a product and kind of creating a text and then kind of making sure that the text is, it's really kind of this thought process, the humanistic element of education that's starting to count.
Welcome to What's the Big Idea? I'm your host, Dan Carney. Artificial intelligence is being met in education with the same emotions as in many industries: fear, excitement, bewilderment. It's the topic of faculty meetings. It's the stuff of conversations in classrooms. It is some teachers changing everything about how they teach, while others are vehemently resisting. Is AI about to change everything, including education? Initiatives like Alpha Schools, which have essentially replaced teacher instruction with chatbots, sure think so, while others, like friend of the pod Gary Steger, see AI as another tool among many. Today's guest, Professor Michael Wagner, thinks AI just might change things, but maybe not in the way you're thinking.
My name is Michael Wagner. I'm an academic. So at the moment, I'm the department head and professor in digital media at Drexel University. I'm in a design college, and I'm sort of the technology educator in the design college. That's usually the way I frame myself.
Back in July, Michael wrote a piece on his Substack with a provocative title, "The End of Cheating as We Know It." He posits that, yes, AI has the power to disrupt everything in education, but ironically, it has also created the conditions for ancient practices of teaching and learning to ascend, methods like Socratic and oral examination, as well as design cycle iteration. He also stresses the importance of making learning local and personal in the age of AI. It's an excellent read, and I'll post it to the show notes. I started off by asking Michael about the state of play back when he began his career.
So when I got into the field, it was actually pre-computer era. So it was actually in the 80s. And during that time, things were completely different. So my original education is actually as a mathematics teacher with a specialty in what we called descriptive geometry. So this was a topic that was related to the use of geometry for communicating architectural drawings or machine drawings. And that was a school subject back in the days. Over the years, I've encountered that multiple times that new technologies enter the field and question everything that we do in education. That was, once again, when computer design came and took away everything that we actually kind of trained for. And then the internet, obviously, the communication devices in the early 2000s. I was one of the first to create an e-learning course in the 90s. At that time I was at Arizona State University, and kind of that brings us pretty much to the current day, where we have the same situation again, with artificial intelligence questioning a lot of things and making a lot of things that we do obsolete. And it's really interesting to see how that progressed.
Originally, I heard about your work from a Substack you wrote over the summer. I think it was over the summer, with one of the most provocative and, I think, for educator, interesting titles I've seen in a long time: "The End of Cheating as We Know It." And it really crystallized for me a lot of the things that I've been thinking about and talking about with other educators about the nature of AI in schools. And actually, just earlier this week, I was in a meeting in which my school was having a conversation about which AI detector we should use. Which AI detector did we want to pay for? We were going through sort of the merits and statistics, often self-reported statistics from these companies. But I think, I think would place this conversation under what you call the collapse of a flawed system. What did you mean by that, and what are your thoughts on AI detection?
My thoughts on AI detection are Well, how should I put this? Well, essentially, I think we are chasing, or we are trying to solve the wrong problem, right? When we think about AI detection, we think we can kind of answer the challenge of artificial intelligence in the same way we answered the challenge of the internet, right? With the internet, we could kind of distribute all kinds of papers, and people could simply copy and paste and kind of reuse content from somewhere else. And with that came sort of the idea that we can simply kind of look into the internet and see if something that has been written is already out there. What struck me is that with artificial intelligence, the discussion has to be done completely differently, because the system itself does not really replicate word by word. It kind of recreates something that might have a similar tone or similar content, but it doesn't really copy and it doesn't really do any copy and paste. So in that sense, I started to really question the idea of going out and seeing if something has been copied from somewhere else, because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense anymore. Um, what we're really doing, if we're doing that, is we are kind of filtering out the students who are not capable of using the technology, right? That's really what we're doing. If you have a student who is really confident in using artificial intelligence, they can actually use artificial intelligence in such a way that can bypass any protection whatsoever. There's absolutely no protection or no detector that is capable of catching everything. So what we are really doing is we are educating our students to become better cheaters by ironically trying to find out who are the ones who are cheating, right? So in that sense, my feeling was that the discussion is moot. We can't. We need to accept that we can't detect everything, and we need to therefore change our way how we approach education in general, because cheating doesn't make it's no longer something that I as an educator can actually actively prevent, right? So in that sense, the question becomes more, how do we change the educational system to deal with the fact that we are no longer able to identify whether something was produced by a student or not?
Yeah, and I want to get to that because I think you really capture this idea that schools need to rethink everything, um, because schools are naturally strapped for time, strapped for cash, strapped for brain space, and we're reactive. And right now, there's a lot of reaction to the AI. What do you, just quickly on the detection thing, what do you make though of all these companies that with their self-reported, their 99% accuracy and their, we have virtually no false positives? What do you make when they make these claims? What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I do understand why they do that, because they are really fighting for survival, right?
Mhm.
Because plagiarism as such is no longer a thing that we really actively pursue, because no student is really copying kind of word by word. So they need to figure out something else, and the only thing they can do is to kind of use um, that AI detection and the need to have these high levels of detection, because otherwise these tools become unusable as well. Because what it really does is it changes the requirement who is actually instead of having certainty about a certain cheating, suddenly you're accusing a student of something, and there's no certainty anymore, right? So that kind of changes completely the who essentially needs to prove what, and what needs to kind of and there needs to be a grievance process, and kind of students need to kind of be able to have some sort of process that can kind of challenge what the teacher said, and kind of all these things. Whereas where in traditional plagiarism it was very clear, right? So yeah, here's the sentence and here's the way you wrote it. It's exactly the same, right? So these companies need to have these extremely high detection rates in order to be able to survive. And my feeling is that they quite often inflate them, and create numbers that institutions feel comfortable with. But I honestly don't see that in reality. Now it might be that currently certain systems have this level of detection, but as soon as a system comes out, it doesn't take particularly long, and people find a way around that. It's actually really easy to do to bypass AI detection. and ironically, you can use AI for that. It's one of those things that I think the money that institutions spend on these systems is better spent elsewhere, right? I do fully understand why institutions would like to do that. I emphasize with teachers who feel threatened and like to have some sort of detection system, but it's not a way that leads us into the future, because it's a huge game of whack-a-mole. It's as soon as something comes out that detects something, somebody else finds a way around that, and really what you're doing is you're just filtering out the students who are not capable of using AI correctly.
Yeah, as you point out in the Substack, these detections are always one step behind, right? And if
They will continue to be one step behind, right? Things there's always this talk about the AI bubble and the bubble burst, and kind of people are, it's plateauing. I don't see any plateauing, honestly. And that is something that I think a lot of people are not aware of. It's still, the developments are still accelerating. And you know, it's a false way to go, to kind of try to figure out a way to kind of detect the AI. Rather, we should find ways to integrate that.
For sure. But you talk about co-authorship, and I think that to me that felt more of like a university way of thinking about students creating writing. Let's talk briefly about that, what you mean by that, before we get to authentic assessment, which I think cuts to the heart of what schools really need to be thinking about from K all the way up through university. But when you talk about co-authorship and the idea of who wrote this, how has that evolved now in the age of AI?
Kind of AI for writing really becomes a tool on how to become more efficient. And co-authorship really is the idea that you're utilizing AI as a tool in order to get your thoughts onto paper. So it's not something that where you ask the AI, write me something, and then essentially you take it and that's it. But rather, it's really a design process. It's a highly iterative process. So the way I usually work is that all the ideas that I have come from my own head, right? So they are in my head, and they kind of get out, and then I start to communicate with an AI agent. And even though people don't like the idea of anthropomorphizing AI, it actually helps if you think of it like a grad student, for example. So I usually think of AI as a grad student.
Can I interrupt you just for a second?
Yeah.
How do you? Because I think that I used to think of AI as being more of a thinking shortcut than a writing shortcut. How do you ensure students aren't in that initial sort of ideation, pre-writing, thinking phase? How do you ensure that students aren't, the AI is not doing too much in that initial phase, and it's not really the student's authentic thinking?
The best way to do that, and that's where it really helps me to be in a design college, right? So our classes are kind of built on the idea of design critiques. So there's a lot of communication going on, right? So when we kind of prepare a certain thing that students are supposed to do, a project that the students doing, we're constantly talking to them, right? I meet with my students on a regular basis. I meet with every PhD student for an hour every week. I kind of so essentially the discussion in class time becomes a discussion kind of time, right? And by having that immediate interaction between the teacher and the student, you can ensure that the thinking process is there, right? And then once you know that the student has understood what they're doing and what they're talking about, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference how they actually end up with the writing.
Okay. Yeah. So that having that relationship, that communication. Okay. So they have the thoughts. So I'm sorry I interrupted you before, but now the co-authorship, that's where that kind of comes in.
Yeah. So kind of it really is a design process. So you're really designing a kind of a paper. You're designing a text. That's what you're doing, and that becomes an iterative process. And what I usually do is I work with multiple AIs simultaneously to make sure that the writing is okay and there's no hallucination going on that I miss for some reason. And in that process, obviously, you also need to check everything, right? So it has become, quite honestly, relatively rare that the good models are hallucinating. It still happens, but it happens less and less. But you need to check everything, and then essentially kind of at some point, like any design process, you come to the conclusion that the text is done. So it's really more the this interaction that you have. And the way I usually like to describe this is I like to think of the AI agent as like a grad student that I'm talking to, right? So when I'm giving a grad student an assignment, right? So I'm giving them an assignment and they go out, and 2 weeks later they come back with something that they wrote or something that they kind of figured out, and something that they built. And then we discuss what worked, what did not work. Sometimes the things that come back are kind of good, sometimes they are not good. And the very same way I kind of interact with an AI, just in a much, much faster way, right? Instead of having like a 2-week period where the student goes out and comes back with something, the AI comes back to me like in a couple of minutes at most, right? So kind of it becomes this iterative process, and that's sort of what I mean by co-authorship, right? So it's no longer, the tool sort of becomes a more active part in the writing process. I fully acknowledge that, right? So being in a higher education, it makes it easier because our students are kind of already familiar with that process, and they kind of use the design process in other areas as well. How to bring that into schools is a completely different story, right? But sort of that is what I mean by co-authorship.
And I do think that trying to bring that into K-12 schools would present quite a few challenges. But which takes me to the latter part of your piece about how, almost maybe counterintuitively or ironically, AI could actually be ushering in deeper learning and authentic assessment because of the necessity to get away from kids just relying on AI. I wonder first, maybe, what if you could define what authentic assessment means to you, because that's a term that rings true for a lot of educators, but it's also a pretty big term. So when you say authentic education or authentic assessment, what do you mean?
Well, for me, it's really kind of more the direct interaction with the student, right? So I also wrote a lot about the Socratic method, and kind of this idea of really interacting with the student, and making the assessment based on that interaction rather than on the actual outcome or in the actual artifact that they create. So it's not really the text that counts. The text becomes relatively irrelevant in the end because the text is kind of created through this co-authorship. What's really important is the thinking process. And in order to get at the base of the thinking process, you need to have the direct communication with the student in order to figure out how they actually kind of think. So that's really kind of at the base of that idea.
Okay. And to this point, that I think, as you say in the piece, that hold on, let me find this. Oh yeah, you say here, we can now focus on designing assessments that not only resist simplistic AI delegation, but better measure and promote deep learning. And you use this phrase, situated cognition. So how can we design assessments that are not just going to say to kids, "Hey, we're opening the door here for you to just go ask chat and just plug in the answer"? What's the solution here?
Well, the solution for us in higher education is something that we are very comfortable with in my particular field, which is sort of the idea of the design critique, right? So the if you're studying anything in design, but the way assessments are usually done is that the teacher will meet with the students as a group, and then they will have an interaction session. So it's pretty much kind of the way you think it is. So there will be boards where they have all kinds of images and papers and everything, and then the student will sort of explain their thinking process, and then the entire class essentially sits next to it, and they will essentially argue against or for it. And it's really this constant questioning of what the student has done that creates the basis of that assessment, right? Now that requires that class sizes are small. Because you cannot do that in big settings, and that's why I think a lot of what we have done over the last decades actually need to be reverted. So we got larger and larger class sizes. Not quite sure about K-12, but in higher education, people tell me they have 200, 300 students in a classroom. That's no longer going to be work, right? So we need to have smaller groups. We need to be able to kind of have more direct relationships between the students and the teachers. We need to change the educational system in such a way that it actually enables that. And that's the most straightforward solution to the problem. Now, I'm not ruling out that people figure out ways on how to kind of do the same thing in a scalable way. That's something that I think is possible. But at the moment, I think if a teacher wants to make sure that their assessments are AI secure, AI safe, they need to integrate a lot of direct interaction with the students. So ironically, one thing that happens, and actually I've talked to many writing teachers, that writing classes will primarily be graded by discussion, right? So it's one of those ironic things that it's really not so much what you've written, but how have you written? Why did you write what you write? What is the thought process that went into that piece? And that kind of is something that happens in a questioning session, right? So it's really kind of going back to that Socratic method. That we need to kind of look into.
I really love all that, because what you're saying, you're getting to the heart of the thought, not the product. Right?
Exactly.
What is going on inside your mind? And you speak in the Substack about local context, personal experience. How can students bring themselves into the work in a way that a chatbot could never do, and multi-stage collaborative processes?
Yeah. Kind of these are, quite frankly, these are skills that people used to have in education, right? So this was one of the primary teaching methods, really, for a very, very long time. And just to tell a story, I recently was at a conference that was a little atypical for me, because it was a conference it was really a humanities conference. I'm not a humanities person, so it's something that I rarely go. But it was in Greece, and the conference attendees kind of went through a couple of sites in Athens, and they are essentially some of the conference and attendees kind of explained what happened at the places that we visited, and they did that in a way that kind of was very based on the Socratic method. So it was a continuous questioning, and I was stunned by how well that worked. And I kind of at the end I said, this is exactly what you need to do when you want to make sure that there's deep learning in the era of AI. And they were kind of surprised, because that's essentially a very old skill that has almost been lost in some way. And so I would recommend that teachers look into kind of how people used to teach a long time ago, because that is really what we need to do. So ironically, what AI is doing it's bringing us back to the core values of education, right? It's no longer kind of output and kind of creating a product and kind of creating a text and then kind of making sure that the text it's really kind of this thought process, the humanistic element of education that's starting to count. And there are methods that people have used for thousands of years that kind of do that, and we just need to kind of revisit those methods and implement them in our daily lives.
Yeah, I love the humanistic element you just brought up. I saw a comment once someone posted. It was sort of a Orwellian picture of how education where it might be moving. It was essentially like AI creates the assignment, AI completes the assignment, AI grades the assignment. Right. And it's maybe in some ways it's just this logical end to, industrial education, right, that we started over 100 years ago. Now here we are, where it's just output, input, output. And I think
and that doesn't. By the way, this was something I actually tried AI grading, and then essentially that's exactly what one of my students said. Essentially, if you're creating the assignment with AI and we are writing the assignment with AI, and we're grading the assignment, what are we actually doing, right? And so that's why for example, I'm a little skeptical about AI grading. So that's something that I kind of think is questionable. But and as teachers, we are really the adults in the room. So it's essentially kind of we need to limit ourselves what we use, right? But yes, so sort of this industrial kind of idea of education does no longer make sense. It does no longer make sense. We need to go back to what education was really meant to be, to kind of to make us better people, and to kind of instill kind of thought processes and make sure that people have the critical thinking skills and the understanding of how the world works and how they function within the world, rather than teaching them how to create the best output in the most efficient way, right? It's ironic. It's turning our education system kind of it kind of re-emphasizes those old values.
Yeah. But it's difficult though, especially in K-12, because we have been overtaxed in so many ways, and AI in some way provides shortcuts that we we kind of know we shouldn't be using, but they're right there in front of us.
Yeah, that's true, and kind of I'm not completely oblivious to those things. In a previous job, I was actually in charge of a teachers college, so I have and we educated teachers of all levels from K to whatever, right? And I'm very I understand sort of the challenges that you're facing in K-12. What I have seen though is that I've always seen teachers rise to the challenge. Kind of there are many highly skilled, very passionate, very capable teachers out there, and my recommendation would be to seek those people out and kind of see what they're doing, and kind of follow their lead to some extent if you're not really comfortable with AI. But I think you need to have some sort of an understanding that things need to change. You cannot remain at the status quo. That's not going to work.
Do you actually work with your students on how to use AI? Is there explicit, um, technical, philosophical? You talk about the use of AI with your students.
Um, yes, and kind of at two different levels. I have one PhD student, Daya Ramazani, and we are currently and her PhD really kind of goes in that direction. And we're currently also working on a book that will come out soon. And with her, I'm really kind of investigating all the challenges that you have and how actually education in general will move into the future. In my other classes, which are more design focused classes, so I teach game design and kind of at the undergraduate at the graduate level. It's interesting because those are students that are vehemently opposed to AI. So you need to be a little bit careful about how you frame everything, because on one hand you need to make sure that they are, once they're leaving the university, they actually have the ability to find a job, and that will require them to be proficient in AI. But at the same time, you also don't want to overload them, because they might actually shut down and kind of say, no, I'm not doing that, right? So it's sort of a very kind of difficult balance that we currently have in certain design disciplines, where AI is becoming a threat to some jobs, right? But yeah, we do that, kind of at all kinds of levels. I taught a class on ComfyUI. I'm not quite sure if you guys know what ComfyUI is, but it's sort of a system that allows you to create images locally on your own machine. And we needed to teach that because some fashion designers, interestingly, were searching for people who have that skill. So that's yes, we have that included. But once again, we need to be relatively careful. We are talking about students who are trying to enter disciplines that are seriously threatened by AI, right? So we need to be very careful on how we do that.
How do your students think about all this? We talk about the design process and authentic assessment, and they also AI. They're interacting with AI outside of the classroom, in the classroom. What kind of reactions are they giving in this bigger question about to AI or not to AI?
to AI and not to AI. You get all kinds of responses, quite frankly. Last term, I think it was last term. Time moves by so fast. I taught a class about research methods, and I decided to, because I wanted our students to really become proficient in the use of AI. So what I did is I decided to create assignments that actually required you to use AI, because otherwise you would have had a hard time to really complete them. So the assignments were kind of really, really difficult. And I'm not going to do that anymore. And the reason I'm not going to do that anymore, because I had actually 2 students in that class that absolutely refused to use AI. So what they ended up doing is they spent hours and hours and hours in order to complete it by hand. So you have everything. You have students that are vehemently opposed in higher education, quite frankly, right? So you have students that are vehemently opposed to the use of AI and avoid it at all cost. And then you have those who embrace it. Now the challenge will be if students are not willing to use AI, they will have a challenge when they try to find a job, because they will be outperformed by those students who are willing to use AI, because AI is in the end an efficiency. It kind of increases efficiency in what you're doing, right? Um, so I'm honestly a little bit concerned about those students who are not willing, opening themselves up to the use of AI. But kind of you have, at the moment, you really have everything.
And students that have not slid into what you call metacognitive laziness, that have had an education that emphasized oral examination or Socratic discussion and deep thinking, from where you sit at the university level, how will they be better situated for post college life, post college careers, versus maybe students that got to use AI and used it a lot through high school, through university? How will they function differently in the world, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it's not an either or question, right? So what you really need is you need both. And either if you are kind of doing one or the other, you're not going to be successful. The students that are going to be successful are the ones that are able to combine those two, right? So they are using the AI tools to make them more efficient and effective, and produce better results, but at the same time have this deep thinking and deep learning and kind of uh, approach to education. So so for me, kind of the challenge will really be that both groups, if you have students that are kind of refusing to use AI and just engaging in the thinking process, they are not going to be productive enough for industry to actually pick them up. And at the same time, those students who are kind of avoiding the term cheating, but sort of kind of getting their way through college by just using AI in order to complete the assignments and not thinking about what actually happened, they're not going to be able to find a job either. You need to have both. You need to be able to fully understand what they're doing, and at the same time also use AI in order to increase your productivity. Um, I've seen that in some of my classes, when one thing that became very apparent over the last couple of months, really over the last year, I would say, is that there are certain students, when they are able to combine those two things, they can actually produce outputs that I haven't seen before. Like, for example, I have a game design class that in our grad program that is for students that are not necessarily coming with a game design background, and usually kind of they made nice little games, and kind of it looked like a student game. But over the last year, I got students who essentially went from 0 to 100 within a couple of weeks, because they are fully engaged in how the process actually works. How do I create a game? How do I design a game? How do I do? And then at the same time use the AI in order to kind of do that in a very short amount of time. And the result was that some of the games that they produced were almost at a commercial level, even though they haven't done anything in game design before. But that required them to really do both, really engage with the topic, but at the same time also use AI in order to get the product done as fast as possible.
It's really fascinating. And education discussions around AI tend to be quite polarized. You do have a lot of educators saying, never, I refuse to even use this. And then other people saying, no, you have to use it. And what you're sort of advocating is this really elegant middle ground where we're developing the deep thinking, but we can't ignore the reality of the technical world that they're graduating into.
Exactly. So essentially, you need to find a middle ground there, and I think for me, the way I see it is really an opportunity to kind of do something substantial and to really kind of make education more kind of better in some ways. Now, I would say though is that from a institutional perspective, right? So if you're managing an institution, it does make sense to have a mix of teachers, right? So I kind of I'm a department head, so I have like a department where I have all kinds of faculty. Some kind of are fully embracing AI, some kind of are on the I'm going to never touch that. It is of value if students are exposed to both worlds, right? So I as a department head, I don't mind to have people in there that say I'm not going to touch that because of this and this and this, because it provides students with an additional perspective. I think it's also dangerous to kind of streamline everything to the same kind of way of thinking. I think there's a difference, but in the end, I think the for the students to be most to be most successful, we need sort of a mixed approach. We need sort of a balanced approach that kind of uses AI for what it's good for, and then at the same time makes sure that students are still kind of thinking critically.
And are your faculty confident with AI themselves? Because I think a lot of, in the K-12 realm, certainly, a lot of teachers, maybe even those that are interested in using AI in different ways, because it feels like it changes so fast.
It
And I
changes.
think, how do you feel confident using it? I think that's actually a roadblock to a lot of teachers. How can I do this with my students if I myself don't feel confident?
That is quite frankly that is the $1 million question. It changes so fast. It changes so fast. It changes on a weekly basis. I when I created that class I was talking about before, the Comfy UI class, right? So I actually had the syllabus set up, everything, and every week, I needed to rewrite everything because things had changed at that point, right? So it becomes almost like a real time kind of process. You certainly can't kind of create a syllabus and then kind of used it for a couple of years. I couldn't even use it for a week. I needed to rewrite it constantly. Um, and there are many people, many teachers that are not able or not willing or don't have the time, quite frankly,
Mhm.
kind of time is also a big challenge to really follow that and that development, and that is a huge challenge. I've talked to many colleagues in my university who said, well, I simply didn't have time to kind of touch it ever, and now that I'm touching it, I'm suddenly realizing that it is able to do that, and that's actually really cool. Can you teach me how to do that? um, so it's, I think there's a certain danger of missing the of missing the boat, right? There's and at the same time, I fully understand, and quite frankly, the same thing for me as well. Kind of it happens to me. I'm almost having that as a full time job now, to really just follow up what's happening in the AI. Right, that's pretty much my full time job, and even I miss developments once in a while. There are certain things that I completely missed, because things are moving so fast. It's almost on a daily basis that something new happens, and yeah, I kind of I really see that as a huge challenge. Now, what I would tell people is to rely on the knowledge that the students bring. Now, this is a little bit different depending on the level that you're teaching, right? So the younger the students are, the kind of the more that. But I think at least in starting at middle school up to high school, I always found it useful. And this is kind of, quite frankly, is also something that we taught our teachers when I was running the teachers college, and game design became a big thing, right? So learning with games, right? So I told them, well, I mean, your students are playing games. Use their knowledge on what the games are and how to actually implement them, and you can put that into context. That's your job as a teacher, but you don't need to. It's perfectly fine to simply have the expertise of your students and integrate that into your planning process. So I would recommend just being cognizant of what your students are doing, and trying to figure out where things are moving, and just being interested in how things develop. The main danger that I see is that the teachers are completely shutting off and said, I'm not going to touch that ever. And that is a problem because if you're shutting yourself out, you also don't know what the limitations are. I cannot tell you how many teachers I've talked to who said, I can confidently identify any writing that a student brings me that is AI generated. I usually have to tell them, no, you can't. It's sort of, you can only identify the crappy ones.
The students that can't do it very well. Yeah.
The students who can do that, you can't.
Yeah.
There's just no way to do that.
Wow.
It's so you need to be interested, really. That's all it is, right? So being interested in how this technology develops and implementing it thoughtfully.
Wow. Well, I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk today. I want to just end on this. Not normally in the business of predictions, and maybe trying to predict anything in AI is futile. But if we looked ahead, even 5 years, 3 to 5 years, where do you think we might be in terms of how students are using it, how teachers are using it, what the nature of school even looks like? I'm sorry if that's an unfair question.
No, it's not an unfair question because it's a question that really is at the base of my job as a department head, right? So if you think about it, I get students into a higher education, and our programs are 5-year programs. So I need to design a curriculum in such a way that they actually have a job 5 years in the future, right? So kind of this 5 years ahead thinking is something that is not an unfair question. It's a question that I have to deal with on a daily basis. The unfortunate answer that I have to give you, I have no clue. The things are moving in such a fast pace that anything is really possible. And kind of, if I would know how things would be in 5 years, kind of, I would probably be very wealthy. And that's not the case. So it's very, very difficult to predict. It's also very difficult to predict that we, quite frankly, don't fully understand how the technology really functions, right? So I mean, we do know how it functions in principle. So it's sort of a network, but why it works is not completely clear. And the fact that we don't really know why it really works the way as well as it does, also makes it really, really difficult to figure out where the limits are, right? So a lot of people are talking about currently about sentient AI and everything, and kind of there's a certain understanding that the current systems are obviously not sentient, but at the same time, we neither know how our own cognitions works in detail, nor do we know how AI cognition works in detail. And the lack of that knowledge makes it really difficult to predict anything because you can essentially predict anything. If it would not surprise me if, like, in 2 years we have a self-aware AI, it would not surprise me. It would also not surprise me if in 2 years everything kind of burst and we are back to the way it was like a couple of years ago. So it is a very fair question, but I think it's completely impossible to answer right now, and that's something a lot of teachers, educators, and also educational institutions are struggling with.
Okay. Well, we'll just have to get you back on the show in 2 years. See where we are. Michael, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Love the Substack. Love all your thinking about this. It's really helped me a lot, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And anytime, just hit me up, and we can talk anytime.
A huge thanks to Professor Michael Wagner for joining me to talk about artificial intelligence. So many important points he brings up. It was so funny to me when he mentioned that it's hard for him to keep up with all the changes in AI, and that's his job, essentially. So how could educators, or really anyone who's not fully dedicated to that, hope to keep up with all the changes? And that's why I would caution any educator out there to experiment with AI on your own, try it out, see what it can do, what it can't do. But more importantly, have that conversation with your colleagues, with your administration about what do we believe about assessment? What do we believe about how students can show what they understand? What do we believe about the thinking process? More than the writing process, more than the processes in math, the scientific processes, what do we believe about the thinking process in our students? That to me is a much more vital question than how are we going to prevent AI from being used to cheat? How can we stop kids from relying on AI? Or the other side, how can we run headlong into AI and implement it in everything we do? More importantly, what do we believe about how students think? Thanks for listening, everyone. Really appreciate it. Stay safe out there, and I hope your school year is off to a great start.